Okay, so this was only my second interview in Jackson, Mississippi, and I squished the two guys very close together. It looks a little weird, so just overlook it because the story is a very important one. Originally, I was just going to interview them, Senator John Horhn and Director of Tourism Malcolm White, about the Blues Commission, which is a very unusual state government concept, and the Blues Trail. But my first surprise came when they acknowledged that they didn't even know how important or beloved the blues were outside of the state of Mississippi till later in life. And my second surprise, was when they told me how the blues had actually sparked the creative economy in Mississippi. Especially heartwarming is my interview with Dr. Edgar Smith, who grew up on the Delta and credits the blues musicians of the day with helping his grandmother keep him in line. Today, he is the retired Vice President of Academics from the University of Massachusetts and the former provost of their medical school. His love for the blues musicians and his sensitivity to their hard times come together in his role on the Blues Benevolence Committee, in which funds musicians who are going through a tough time. I marvel at how he overcame so spectacularly the financial deprivation of his past, and it's such a warm-hearted example of how the love of his grandmother and the blues musicians conquered all. Enjoy the video.
Why must it be this way? The only recording that I have is of a song that I wrote called the Uninsured Blues, which I recorded with Ironing Board Sam. And actually when John Kerry came here when he was running for president, I knew him because he and I had been arrested together on Lexington Green protesting the Vietnam War. And that's when I was living in Massachusetts. And I gave that to him just to use in his campaign because of the uninsured, because there were over 40 million people that were not insured. The blues sprang out of the conditions of folk who were primarily spending most of their time in the cotton fields, and they were suffering because they really had no other financial income. They really had no power. So the blues were the ways in which they could express their feelings. Actually, during the times of slavery, they were not allowed to sing songs like the blues. You know, you could do only gospel and things of that nature. But around the 1870s, you began to see people began to express themselves in terms of their real feelings, how they really, really felt. And this, to me, is how the blues began. I can recall in this country town, when folk would be out would come into the town on Saturday nights because they had been working hard, they had been suffering, they'd been under pressure all during the week. The blues was like a steam valve for them. They could sort of get rid of all that frustration. That's why there was some violence sometimes associated with the blues, because they had suppressed it during the week. They had been treated so badly and had no power, no recourse to respond. And so come Saturday night, they could let it all hang out, and that's exactly what they did. They had a lot of fun, and of course, some of them would get up and go to church on Sunday morning. But the blues was like a catharsis in my mind, and it served that purpose. Without the blues, I think some of those folk would have gone stone crazy.
I grew up in the blues and didn't realize it. My father had a small business where he would have jukeboxes, pinball machines, pool tables, and that sort of thing, and he would service juke joints with them. And we would take the newest music of the week out or the month out and load it onto the jukeboxes, and I really, really hated that job. I hated it because I had to give up my weekends, my Saturdays and Sundays to run the route, as my dad called it. And then it took my going away to Kentucky to school. And I was in college, and was one of my classmates' dorm room, and there was this music playing. I said, man, I really like that music. Who is it? He said, well, you ought to like it. That's John Lee Hooker. He's from Clarksdale, Mississippi. And then he launched into all this history about blues artists and the impact of blues music on American popular music. And that it was really the basis for American popular music. And I never thought of it that way. It was that music that I had to listen to when we ran the route, and so I had a bad attitude about it. And it took someone from outside Mississippi to turn me on to the blues.
For me, it was the British invasion. You know, when I was in high school, and the bands that were popular, the music that I listened to were primarily British artists: Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, you know, Eric Clapton, the Kinks. All of these people were playing American blues music, and I didn't know it at the time, but the music that we were dancing to and listening to as kids was our music being brought back to us from overseas.
Well, you know, the first time I just created it.
Yeah, and we had a few meetings.
We had a few meetings,
but we never really got.
It didn't go anywhere. But then Governor Musgrove, for 1 year, established the Mississippi Blues Commission, and it was to put together a report. And once the report was done, it was dissolved. And I said, you know, this music is so important that we really should not let this commission go.
Okay.
And so we wound up forming a piece of legislation to institutionalize it.
You know, originally it was designed to honor what we call the birthplace of America's music, to honor the blues. And then as it sort of matured and the journey continued, we were looking for ways to create visitor experiences. And then beyond that, we've gotten into what we call the work of benevolence, where we literally raise money and work with blues practitioners who have financial needs, health needs. So we're both, you know, we're about economic development, we're about tourism, we're about benevolence, and we're also about sort of telling this story and sort of claiming this piece of American culture. And we do that through the building of these trails, through the erection of particular markers in communities. And each place that we go, it's a partnership. It's not just the state of Mississippi showing up with a historical marker and saying to a community, we're here and here's your story. We have blues scholars, and we work with the communities to raise matching monies, and we have a full-on relationship, whether it's working with a museum or with private property owners or with communities, so that there's this huge investment. And the great thing about the Blues Trail is that its purpose was to attract people, but also to lead people to places. For example, the Blues Trail has led people to Indianola, and we have built the B.B. King Museum. The Blues Trail has led people to Cleveland, and we are building the Grammy Museum. The Blues Trail leads people to the Highway 61 Blues Museum in Leland, Mississippi, where we have 3 blues markers. So it leads people around to other attractions, but it also builds civic pride, which is probably not something that we were really thinking about in the early days, but it's certainly been one of the...
The one thing that I've been amazed by is how much communities embrace their Blues Trail marker. It's a real badge of honor and pride for them. Different communities like the notoriety and getting recognition for the artists who live there, who perform there, and who in many instances got their names there, made their bones, so to speak. And so we have a lot of instances where communities come together to raise money, and a lot of these communities are really struggling. They don't have a lot of resources laying around, but they piece their money together to find the matching monies to establish a marker there, and the community comes out. Oftentimes we'll have local performers, and certainly the local elected officials and citizens who are active in the community come out to celebrate the fact that they're getting a marker in their community.
And the funding is a fascinating sort of quilt. In the earliest days, we wrote grants to the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we got federal dollars to help us get started that would be matched by local and state dollars. We've gotten grants from the Mississippi Department of Transportation because they're our partner, and that's an unlikely partner. You think, well, what does the Department of Transportation have to do with a cultural initiative? And the answer is everything, because people have to travel on roads, and we have to gain access to right-of-ways and byways in order to erect these. And then sometimes when we erect on a marker on a small rural road, we have to think about where will the visitor park. Or, so there's a lot of issues that we've sort of dealt with in creating these partnerships. But we also raise money by selling car tags. You can buy a Mississippi Blues Trail car tag in Mississippi, and the funds go to the work of promoting the trail. We have a benevolence fund, as I mentioned before, where we do fundraisers around that. We have a foundation, which is our fiscal agent. So we have a commission and a foundation.
About the benevolence fund, we have a lot of our artists who still are struggling economically. A lot of them fall on hard times, and maybe that's why they still play and sing the blues. But we had something to occur a couple of years ago where an anonymous donor donated $100,000 towards our benevolence fund, and it's been able to really stretch our resources.
We have awarded over $17,000 in grants to blues musicians. We've had cases in which one musician's he lost his home. His house burned down, he lost his instruments, and we gave him a grant. Just recently, we awarded a grant to an individual who really needed some money to meet his day-to-day obligations, as well as to buy his medicines. You see, most of these guys and gals don't have any type of medical insurance, and even some of them, we had a case in which one individual really didn't know how to apply to Medicaid. So we're trying to assist not only in terms of actual funding, but with some type of advice to help them make it in life, because these folk have really not gotten what they deserve in terms of the monies from the blues, and we're trying to address some of their needs. You got it right. This is a passion for me. It is a passion because I didn't discover the blues yesterday. I grew up with the blues. I grew up in the Mississippi Delta, which is considered the home of the blues. And it's interesting. Blues folk, even though they were kind of rough and rowdy at the juke joints, they saw what my grandmother was trying to do in terms of keep me on the straight and narrow. And they would do all they could to assist her. They did not try to engage me in all that kind of stuff, but they tried to keep me going straight, and I appreciate that. And I feel as if I'm paying a debt to those individuals who helped me achieve whatever I've achieved, wherever I am now. I owe a lot to a lot of people. I retired from the University of Massachusetts, where I was academic vice president. Prior to that, I was professor of biochemistry and molecular biology at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, and I was provost of the medical center. So I've been in administration and in research. I did my research in cancer research, 17 years of cancer research, 5 years sickle cell anemia, and I also spent a year as interim president of Tougaloo College, my alma mater.
Well, when I was at the Arts Commission, we decided we would take a scientific look at the creative economy in Mississippi. We all knew that Mississippi had birthed these amazing artists, blues artists, literary, architects, designers, poets. We did a study, and we were astounded to find that over 60,000 people in Mississippi worked in the creative sector of our economy, and that about 3.5% of Mississippi's economy was in this creative sector. And that really surprised a lot of people. Honestly, I thought it might even be as much as 5%, but it was a great place to start a conversation about not only these creative types that represent Mississippi, but back in the state where creativity intersected with manufacturing, and where creativity intersected with industry, and where creativity intersects with community development and tourism. And it's about looking at the sum total of the economic impact on cultural and creative enterprises, creative individuals, and creative communities, and then trying to think about, you know, how do you grow this? And can you grow? Can government impact a sector of its economy that is so unusual and unique as the creative sector? So we've begun that journey, and we've begun to talk about it as a strategy, an economic development strategy, not just in tourism, but again, you take the Viking Range Corporation, which basically was a stove manufacturing. But the long tail of Viking was that they reinvigorated, they redeveloped Greenwood through their successes by investing in cooking schools and spas and hotels and restaurants and live music venues. And so you saw this, we got to witness in a very short time here, in just a number of years, about the length of time that the Blues Trail has been developed. In about a decade, we've seen like PV Electronics literally not only be a global success, but its impact back in Meridian, which is where they're headquartered. So we've seen these creative economies really have huge impacts on redefining and redeveloping communities. And we've seen the Blues Trail become an important part of the sort of creative assets of communities, where people see them as an attractor, both for visitors, for building civic pride, and also just for sort of rounding out the quality of life in a community.
Yeah, and you know, we had done all that really without incentivizing. The growth of it had been organic. The state hadn't really focused on it. But what we started to do was look at, okay, well, how can we incentivize it? So we're doing a much better job of providing those kinds of incentives that I call non-traditional economic development incentives. Because most of our incentives are focused on manufacturing and industrial development. But if we were to apply the same kind of energy towards incentivizing the creative economy, we can have a much better rounded economy here in Mississippi. A good example of a community that has done that is Ocean Springs. They built their community around the visual arts and crafts community there. Another one is Clarksdale. Clarksdale is really becoming a mecca for the blues. And I really think that in 5 years, Clarksdale is going to be like a Soho of the South, because so many artists are moving there. They're building loft apartments in downtown now that
abandoned communities.
And right, and a lot of the buildings had previously been abandoned and we're sitting lying fallow. But Clarksdale's buzzing now, and it's because of the blues. One of the things that we've got to do in Mississippi is have that live music experience every day of the week somewhere in the state, so that when visitors come, they're expecting live music. And you know, if it's Wednesday, well, we don't do much live music on Wednesday. You need to come back on Friday. Well, that's not what's going to be attractive to the visitor. We've got to have it ready for them whenever they show up.
But live music in Mississippi is no different than live music in New York and Los Angeles. It primarily happens on the weekends. And that's a problem that Senator Horhn's talking about. We've got to figure out a way to incentivize live music on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. Ireland went through this. When Ireland was going through their Renaissance and they were selling Ireland as an experience, the one thing that a visitor to Ireland absolutely wanted to see was live music in a pub. So the government got involved and began to incentivize the hiring of local musicians so that visitors would have the experience that they traveled across the ocean for, around the globe for. And we've got to figure that one out. We've got to figure out a way to where if you go to the trouble, expense to come to Mississippi and you've never been here before and you're interested in our culture, whether it's literary, Civil War, civil rights, architecture, food, the arts, music, regardless, we've got to be able to demonstrate an authentic, real experience for you so that you aren't disappointed.
Right.
So we're working on that, but again, we are a work in progress. There was a time when there were more live music venues than there are now, but through this effort, through the sort of promoting of the creative economy, through the work in live entertainment and the Blues Trail, we're beginning to reap some dividends from this investment. And who would have ever thought that this thing called the blues, which nobody wanted and everybody ran from, would become the thing that we could hang our hat on, become the thing that we could begin to change our image around, to invite people to come and experience. But it is sort of one of those ironies of our culture. It's really interesting that this thing that was so awful and was so sort of dreaded has become our calling card.